So this is from the Intelligencer. And the headline is, Why Our Economy May Be Headed for a Decade of Depression. So this is kind of redundant, but it's by a different guy who's smarty. Rubini, what's his first name?
Nouriel?
Yes. So he was the economist who predicted the housing crash back in 2008. He predicted that in 2006. So that's why I was, when that happened, I was one of the guys running around. Well, economists are absolutely worthless because not one of them predicted this happening. So what is the point of studying it, being an economist, if you can't predict the biggest economic crash in the history of the world? Well, one guy did. It was Nouriel Roubini. And now this is an article quoting him. While many investors bet on a V-shaped recovery, do you know what that means, Dylan? What is a V-shaped recovery?
So imagine if when they talk about the shape of a recovery, they're just talking about the level of economic activity. So a V obviously has a line down and then a pretty steep line, the parallel line going back up, right? In the letter V. And so it's just a metaphor for an economy that immediately rebounds straight back up. So it goes straight down and then turns around and goes straight back up.
So if you're
in terms of the level of activity.
Okay, so if you're looking at a chart, a graph, and let's say
exactly.
let's say the Dow Jones you're using as your metrics, all of a sudden it crashes one day, then it pops up the other day. That's the V.
That's a V-shaped recovery.
That's a V-shape. Yep. Okay. So while many investors bet on a V-shaped recovery, Roubini is staking his reputation on an L-shaped depression. Oh, shit. The Economist...
He sounds like Umair.
Yeah, he does. The Economist does expect things to get better before they get worse. He foresees a slow, lackluster, U-shaped economic rebound in the pandemic's immediate aftermath. But he insists that this recovery will quickly collapse beneath the weight of the global economy's accumulated debts. Specifically, Roubini argues that the massive private debts accrued during both the 2008 crash and the COVID-19 crisis will durably depress consumption and weaken the short-lived recovery. Meanwhile, the aging of populations across the West will further undermine growth while increasing the fiscal burdens of states already saddled with hazardous debts of load. Although deficit spending is necessary in the present crisis and will appear benign at the onset of recovery, it is laying the kindling for an inflationary conflagration by mid-decade. As the deepening geopolitical rift between the United States and China triggers a wave of deglobalization, negative supply shocks akin those of the 1970s are going to raise the cost of real resources even as hyper-exploited workers suffer perpetual wage and benefit declines. Prices will rise, but growth will peter out since ordinary people will be forced to pare back their consumption more and more. Stagflation will beget depression. And through it all, humanity will be beset by unnatural disasters, from extreme weather events wrought by man-made climate change to pandemics induced by our disruption of natural ecosystems. Roubini allows that after a decade of misery, we may get around to developing a more inclusive, cooperative, and stable international order. But, he hastens to add, any happy ending assumes that we find a way to survive the hard times to come. Holy cow. What do you say to that, Dylan?
I mean, those are the stakes. Those are the stakes, and it's that pathway that our politicians are accelerating us down. Let me reiterate, it's not just Trump and the Republicans. It's very much a trajectory that we're being thrown down by that Pelosi-Trump axis. And I don't accept it as a foregone conclusion, but I've been trying to identify it as the primary risk and potentially likely outcome, barring meaningful course correction or mitigation.
We should do a documentary. That's what we should do. Okay, I just made up my mind. All right, we should do like a
You're gonna do a documentary?
Yeah, we should do, because I just thought of what just flashed in my head was Bill Clinton, Al Gore debating Ross Perot over NAFTA, and Ross Perot said, "You know that huge sucking sound? That's the sound of jobs being sucked to Mexico." Remember that sucking sound? He said, and then and the next thing that flashed in my head was George Bush on stage during his re-election campaign in front of 20,000 people, and or so many thousands of people in a stadium, and he had a woman in her 60s on stage with him, and he asked her if she had a job, and she said, "I work 3 jobs." And he said, "Wow, isn't that great? Isn't that uniquely American?" As if it was a good thing. No, that's a woman who has to work 3 jobs just to pay her basic needs, where in other countries they just need 1. So that's a failure of our system. And there it was right out in the open, and there was George Bush cheering it on. That's literally a symptom of the destruction of our economy and our country, and he thinks it's neat. He thinks it's a uniquely American, like that's great. And then you go to Barack Obama, and it's the documentary writes itself.
But look at what happened in March of 2020. Look at the policy decisions that were made by American politicians in March of 2020 to facilitate the single largest transfer of wealth in the history of the world. Figure the largest transfer of wealth in the history of the world was the financial crisis before this event.
Right.
But because of the financial crisis, they figured out how to efficiently transfer wealth in a way that doesn't trigger the population's awareness for months or years after the fact.
Right.
And they used it brilliantly, and they used this virus as a brilliant opportunity to do this.
And they're doing it.
And then told you they were helping.
And said they were, hey, we're
called it the CARES Act.
Hey, we're getting you $600 extra on unemployment. People literally say that to me on Twitter. Well, what would we do without that extra $600? I needed that $1,200 pay. I needed that relief right away. That's what they said. They needed that relief right away. So that relief was like a bullet, a lead bullet with some cocaine on the tip. That's what they were. I need that bullet. Yeah. All right. Well, would you put on a yellow vest if that time came in America? Are you a yellow vester?
I mean, I would do it for something. I can't. While I understand that why protests are obviously against things, I believe that activating that negative force, while gosh, it couldn't be more logical, and it's almost impossible to stop because the degradation is so severe. There's such a degradation of people that happens. It's almost impossible to stop that negative force. But the system, the way it's built, is designed to exploit that negative force to become stronger and to weaken and eliminate the resistance. It does not know how to deal with a coherent force for health, for Medicare for all.
Right. It's always better.
And so I would not only participate in such a thing, I would encourage it.
It's always better to be for something.
Suggesting pulse protests for healthcare, I think, is the sooner the better.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Hey, did you see our friends over in Hong Kong picked it up again last night? Did you see that?
Well, I mean, the Chinese dropped the hammer. So
yeah.
What are they going to do? I mean, now, it's like, for all my talk and aberration for their protest methods, the counter argument is, well, what good did it do? The Chinese still rolled heavy and still completely just obliterated the legal separation. So, I mean, it's going to be an interesting summer over there. My concern is, again, when you just get to this level of degradation, for whatever sweet words I might offer or whatever ambition and aspiration Gandhi or Nelson Mandela might offer, it's really, really unusual for these things not to become violent.
Right.
And that is troubling. Not because I don't understand where the violence originates, but because as the violence introduces itself as it courses through the veins of those streets, all of the leverage to do anything evaporates with it.
Yes.
All the leverage to get what they want is lost in that violence.
That is correct. That is correct.
And it's not a fair fight because, if I've got a dog in a cage and I keep poking the dog and poking the dog and poking the dog, and finally the dog, becomes hostile, and then I blame the dog for being hostile, when there's been a person poking the dog in a cage for years, like, what do you think the dog's going to do? But the reason Gandhi's name is a known name, the reason Mandela's name is a known name, is because they understand the sort of energetic jujitsu that's required to transmute the logical rage of the degradation into that coherent presence for one thing. It's very unusual and unlikely that it will occur in Hong Kong. I mean, I'd be shocked if Hong Kong doesn't become increasingly violent, only because of the intensity of the betrayal from China and all the effort and all the frustration that must exist there. And that's true for any place. I mean, that's why I speak sort of with some admiration to what they've done up to this point, because I think it deserves admiration in some positive respect because it's highly unusual. The Spanish, it's easy. In Barcelona, they'll just go into the street and burn stuff, but that's easy. That's primal rage. It's logical primal rage from degradation. But logical primal rage from degradation, unfortunately, only further empowers the oppressor.
Right. Yeah. I know.
That's the problem. But how do you manage logical primal rage? It takes a spectacular spiritual leader, basically, which is what Gandhi was and what Mandela was, and even they were flawed.
Right. Martin Luther King also could use one of those. Yeah, it doesn't look like that's happening. It looks like the system is a very easy. The establishment is easy to co-opt anybody, and if they can't co-opt you, they just put you in prison. It seems like that's the way it works in the United States. So we'll see. Maybe, once I put the yellow vest on, we'll see how long it takes them to put me in prison. But that's.
I don't think it's going to come to that. I think there's a clear role for you to play over the next chapter of American history, and I think that you're already serving it and doing a fine job. So I think that you're going to have plenty to do from right where you're seated.
Well, we're going to do it. We're going to get it done. Dylan Ratigan, I thank you very much for taking time out on Corona Money Talk once again. Everybody, you can get this entire segment with Dylan, Corona Money Talk, as an audio podcast, which drops every Wednesday. Audio podcast of the Corona Money Talk with Dylan Ratigan. It's on iTunes, Stitcher. Now it's even on Spotify. We're on Spotify. I didn't even know we were. I tried to go access Spotify today on my phone, right? Impossible to get through. I tried to sign up. They said, you're already signed up. I tried to sign in. They said, you can't sign in. There's a problem. I'm like, what's the problem? There's no one to call. It's fuck. I can't believe it. Anyway, but Mr. Spotify, if you're out there, info@jimmydorecomedy.com, I will lease you this show for a low Jimmy Dore price of $10 million over 3 years. How about that? Okay. All right, Dylan, thank you again very much. Everybody check out Dylan on the Tasty Trade podcast with Tom Sosnoff. It's called Truth or Skepticism. Everybody check that out. Anything else you want to say before you go?
I mean, no. Listen, I think your number's a little low there at 10 million, but
That's just to lease.
see what they come up with.
That's just for a lease. I'm not going to sell the show. I'm just going to lease it to him for 3 years.
Okay, that's a rental.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a rental.
All right.
Then I use that 10 million to get me more money. You see what I'm saying? And you know how it works.
Podcast will drop
I
on our
understand.
website after the show tonight.
Oh, also the podcast will drop at jimmydorcomedy.com on our website right after the show tonight. How about that? Okay. All right, everybody.
It's everywhere.
That's right. We're everywhere. All right, Dylan Ratigan, it's always great to talk to you. We'll be in touch.
Peace on earth. Watch the primal rage. Transmute the primal rage. Transmute.
That's the word for today is transmute.
That's the word today. Is transmute the primal rage.
Okay. All right, buddy. Good to talk to you. See you soon.
All right. Bye.
Hey, this is the part where I tell you where our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then I would tell you to go join our premium, but nobody has a fucking job. So why don't you just enjoy the video?